Pope Leo overrules a ban on the traditional Latin Mass in an American parish. Will this become a trend? And why is a priest convicted of possessing child pornography working in the Vatican? The Prayerful Posse will explore it all. Welcome to this Arroyo Grande series, The Prayerful Posse. Let's convene the posse. Joining me now, Father Gerald Murray, canon lawyer of the Archdiocese of New York, and Robert Royal, editor-in-chief of the Catholic Thing. I'm Raymond Arroyo. There was a big story on the liturgy front, gents. All across the world, the traditional Latin Mass is being banned, thrown from parishes, following Pope Francis's crackdown. But Pope Leo may be offering the traditional Mass community a lifeline. Don't forget to subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show, to our channel on YouTube, on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We don't want you to miss an episode of The Posse. Okay, I want to get back to that unexpected development in this ongoing war on the traditional Latin Mass. Pope Leo XIV himself has approved an exemption to the ban on the ancient rite for one parish in the Diocese of San Angelo, Texas. St. Margaret of Scotland Parish applied for an exemption from Pope Francis's draconian limits on the celebration of the old rite back in February. Well, on May 28th, their petition was granted with Pope Leo's approval. Father, why do you think Pope Leo granted this exemption to this one parish himself?
I think this is a good sign. It means that the bishop of that diocese requested it, because that's where the initiative started. And that was always a possibility under Pope Francis, to have parishes celebrate the Mass. But they were commonly either the bishop didn't want to ask for it, or the Vatican said no, or said yes for a year or two. So this is a good sign, because it means that Pope Leo is cognizant that people who want to go to the Latin Mass want to do so like everybody else in a parish church. They don't want to have to go to a convent or a chapel or some outward place. So this is good. I'm very happy.
Okay, Bob, does this indicate an openness to a restoration of what Pope Benedict had? And remember, just to remind those who may not be as familiar, Pope Benedict, the two popes removed from now, before, he approved the traditional Latin Mass. Any priest could say it anywhere in the world, and it kind of brought a close to a long period of liturgical tumult. This was, and it was peaceful for a long time. Might Pope Leo be moving back to something like that? Could this be the start of a trend?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think we all would like to have seen him come out swinging and really just reverse this and say, you know, on second thought, and maybe this will happen at some point, the limitations placed on the traditional Latin Mass, almost to the point of abolishing it, just have produced too much pain. And as they found out in the survey of the bishops, a lot of bishops thought it would produce more harm than good. I think we want to go slow here, though. I know people get frustrated. I myself am frustrated trying to figure out where we're going, because Leo strikes me as a person who is not a kind of a revolutionary guy. He likes kind of smooth transitions. He seems to have a very pleasant personality. He may be the type of guy who, in dribs and drabs, gives us bits and pieces of this here and there. And sooner or later, if that continues, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't, you get to the point where whatever the actual rules were, in effect, now the Latin Mass has been approved in a variety of places. So it's a good first step, but we want to see some other steps rather quickly, because clearly there's been an injustice done here.
Yeah, Father, as you mentioned, Bishop Michael Sis, who is the Bishop of San Angelo, he requested that exemption from Pope Francis's ban, and the local parish priest posted this tweet thanking the Vatican for the permission. The curious thing is here, that permission is only for 2 years, Father, which I frankly don't understand. This is a valid, licit right. And Father Freddie Perez says the attendees in his parish are mostly young families, and it's the most heavily attended Mass in his parish. What about the other traditional Catholics facing exile from their parishes, Father? Why only make this exemption for one parish?
Well, I mean, this is where the next step is. You know, Catholics in Detroit, for instance, should now write to their bishop and say, could you make a similar application? Because the Mass was reduced from, I believe, 28 parishes to 4. And, you know, wait a minute, you just disrupted the life and prayer of 28 different Catholic communities. No, The 2-year limit reflects what Pope Francis had written in his letter when he set up Traditionis Custodes. He said that eventually everybody will have to return to the new Mass. So the idea was we'll tolerate it for a few years, but that's just kind of a runway to your acceptance. And eventually this plane is going to land. There'll be no more Latin Masses. Pope Leo has to really change that mentality, saying, look, we respect the legitimacy and value of the traditional Latin Mass, and the people who go to it deserve also to be respected.
Yeah, that weaning people away and thinking that 2 years is going to do it is kind of silly. I mean, and you see after those first exemptions expired, they're asking for another exemption. This law needs to go. Traditionis Custodes, which was the document, the motu proprio that Pope Francis passed, it really does need to go away. And guys, someone reminded me this week, they sent me something that Mother Angelica told me during an interview for her biography. And I think it really speaks to where those young people, and even those who are not part of the Catholic faith, they come to the Latin Mass because they're looking for something. Here's what she said. During the Latin Mass, you had the Missal, if you wanted to follow it in English. It was almost mystical. It gave you an awareness of heaven, of the awesome humility of God who manifests himself in the guise of bread and wine. The love that he had for us, his desire to remain with us, is simply awesome. You could concentrate on that love because you weren't distracted by your own language. You could go anywhere in the world and you always knew what was going on. It was contemplative because as the Mass was going on, you could close your eyes and visualize what really happened. You could feel it. Bob, I think that's how a lot of people feel when they attend the traditional Roman rite. These are not people, by the way, who grew up or have a nostalgic, trip or are holding on to something. These people are encountering the old Mass for the first time.
Yeah, I'm always surprised at people who turn away from the Latin Mass because they consider it old. I did grow up under the Latin Mass. As a altar boy, I actually memorized all the responses so that I could get to do weddings and funerals and just be at the regular Mass and get out of school mostly, is why we were all motivated back in those days. But for me, and I have retained a love for Latin my whole life as a result of that exposure. To me, it takes us way back into the beginnings of the Church. And I've said this many times on this show, but in a time when we all feel at sea, and especially when young people are looking for an anchor to something, what better could you have? Greek is a great language too. But we're not going to all begin to learn a new alphabet and whatnot. And there are a lot of Latin words that overlap with our English words. And so this is something that we have that is present. It's approachable. It's clearly having an energizing effect on Catholics today, young Catholics today. I don't see what the major downside is. I think that the big difficulty for Leo is going to be negotiating a personal problem. And that is that on the one hand, he was very close with Francis. He wants to respect the legacy of Francis, and that's his right to do. But on the other hand, he's faced with what clearly is an error and something that needs to be corrected. So I think that's the drama we're not going to see played out.
As Bob said that, Father, I'm mindful of Mother Angelica, who was broadcasting the Mass from her own convent, and they put cameras in when she built her new shrine, and they were doing the Mass ad orientem facing east. Now, it was the new rite, but it was in Latin, and you had the priest facing east, facing away from the people, or rather praying with the people. My question is this. The bishop said they could no longer broadcast that, and indeed EWTN does not broadcast that Mass any longer, because they didn't want to acclimate people to that form of reverent, sacred worship. Frankly, I think it's the most abysmal thing they've ever done as far as television production is concerned. Not that the bishops have a great track record. But your thoughts on this bias against the traditional Roman Latin foundation upon which the new Mass rests?
Yeah, that's manifested when you forbid ad orientem, which is Mass facing toward the crucifix, the tabernacle. Coram Deo is another way we talk about it. You're facing toward the east because you're looking toward the returning Messiah on the second coming. So that really is, Cardinal Sarah said that if you really want to make the new Mass a more reverent experience, celebrate the Mass ad orientem, not facing the people, because the sacrificial aspect comes forward. Now, we had a couple of bishops recently, others in the past, forbid the new Mass ad orientem in their diocese. Well, about 10 days ago, Pope Leo celebrated Mass ad Orientem in the chapel of the Carabinieri, which are the Italian police who guard Castel Gandolfo, and he did that publicly. It's a public Mass. So there can't be any the Pope is the model of the liturgy celebrated for the rest of the Roman Church. So if the Pope does it ad Orientem, everybody else can. So I hope bishops will withdraw those imprudent decisions they've made. But then let's get back to your question, which is foundations. Remember the Lord said, don't build on sand, build on. We've got to know where we came from in order to know how we can go somewhere, in the future. And we came from a tradition of worship which is grounded in the Old Testament temple. It's grounded, of course, in our Savior's the Last Supper and the crucifixion, and then the practice of the early church, which kind of brought it all together. So to say that after 1965, nothing from the old can be kept, that's one reason why young people are saying, no, let me dip into that and find out what's going on. And once they do, they say, this is where I want to go.
Yeah, no, and when I see these young people packing in, they all have that same spirit and wonder that Mother Angelica had when she went to the Mass. And she did approach it almost with a childlike wonder. She was in awe of the entire experience. And she just thought the vernacular brought that otherworldliness, that supernatural quality, that mysticism down a notch or two, and ended up preferring the other form of the Mass, which is reverent and beautiful and attractive, obviously, or people wouldn't be coming in such vast numbers. Anyway, there's a kind of disturbing story. I almost hated to get to this, but I think we should address it. A former official at the Vatican Secretariat of State returned to work this week after serving a 5-year prison sentence for possession of child pornography. Father Carlo Capella is his name. His criminal charges originated in 2017. The priest of the Archdiocese of Milan had been stationed in the Apostolic Nunciature in D.C. That's the Vatican's embassy in the United States, in Washington, headed by Cardinal Christophe Pierre. Now, in 2018, Capella was convicted by a Vatican court for possession and distribution of child pornography with the aggravating circumstance of its large quantity. That was in the prosecution. Bob, both the U.S. and Canada wanted to prosecute this priest. The Canadians had a warrant out for his arrest after he downloaded child porn in Ontario during a visit. I guess the Vatican refused to waive the diplomatic immunity, and he fled to the Vatican. What's going on here?
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that I think this is just another example of what I would call misplaced mercy. Certainly we want to be merciful. He seems to have been very repentant, but that's not enough. In a case like this, where, as you rightly say, arrest warrants are issued because he's not only had downloaded, but he was distributing whatever that meant. Now, I tried to look into this, and apparently he put some images up on, is it called Tumblr, which may be a gay exchange.
It's an online site. It's like an Instagram. It's an old Instagram type site.
But look, this offense, which clearly is a grave evil. He was reduced from being a Monsignor to a priest. Maybe Father Murray, as a canonist, would like to talk to why he wasn't removed from the priesthood. I know personally priests who were removed for just the slightest accusation of things that they were even later exonerated from, and were removed from ministry, worked in menial jobs out in the secular world. And this man, apparently even while he was in prison in the Vatican for 5 years, was working with the Secretariat of State, and then gets put back in a job secretly in a way. It's just another of these examples where certain people who are close to influential figures in the Vatican kind of get a half pass, while in the rest of the world, if a priest were guilty of that, he would be in deep, deep trouble. Even the Vatican said he couldn't go back to a parish or to a diocese. So what does that tell us about the way that they dealt with it?
Yeah, Father, this is to me, it's scandalous. He's at work at the Vatican Secretariat of State, as Bob mentioned. He served 5 years in a Vatican jail, and an official at the Secretariat of State told Pillar, I'll read this, it was clearly presented as an act of mercy. The intention was that this man, who had not been laicized but clearly could not return to his diocese or serve in a parish, could collaborate in the office and remain in the Vatican where he is effectively secluded, but without a formal office. Your thoughts on this, Murphy?
Yeah.
Given the grave nature of the crimes here, Father.
All right, I have a lot to say on this. Let's start this. Let's say if he wasn't a Vatican official priest, let's say he was a Swiss guard. Bob's read that. Let's say he was a Swiss guard and he was assigned to a nunciature overseas and he was looking at child pornography. Would he be left into the Swiss guard? Would he be given duties of protecting priests in the Vatican? Of course not. He'd be removed. He's untrustworthy. You don't put police enforcement in the hands of criminals. Why is it that a criminal priest is allowed to stay working as a priest at all, let alone in the Vatican, where he's occupying an important role, which he, of course, is involved in decision-making and analysis and advice regarding other priests and their behavior? This is absurd. This man is obviously unqualified to be a shepherd of souls. Let's say this had happened when he was a seminarian and he caught him with child porn. Would they ever have ordained him and said, I'm sorry, you can't work in parishes. We're going to send you to the Vatican Secretary of State so you can work as a paper pusher? It's absurd. It's all wrong. Bob is right. This is misplaced mercy. There is no mercy when you signal to your institution that you can view child pornography and stay on the job. No mercy in that.
Yeah, and just so people know, and I'm not going to get into it, this is a family show, I don't want to get scandalous, but these are, the reports are that these are images and videos of adults interacting with these children. Okay, it's not just pictures of the children. It's graphic, horrible, evil stuff. And Father, I guess the reason they have to keep him in the walls of the Vatican is because you've got the United States and Canada that want to prosecute him because he broke laws in those countries. So they've got to keep him there.
Well, maybe.
He should be sweeping, he should be clipping the hedges in the Vatican garden or something. He shouldn't be working.
He shouldn't be a priest. And then secondly, he had diplomatic immunity in America because he was a diplomat. I don't know if he had diplomatic immunity in Canada because he was visiting there as a tourist. Unless he was sent there and there was an arrangement with the Canadian government, he could work in the... I don't think that's what happened. So, the Vatican should have been upright. Remember we said during the child abuse thing, bishops must cooperate with secular authorities in the pursuit of justice. Well, the Vatican's not cooperating with the Canadians. Yeah, send him back to Ottawa, but remove him from the priesthood first because he doesn't deserve to be a priest. And he himself should recognize, if he's truly repentant, he should say, yes, I understand. I can't be a shepherd of souls in the future because I betrayed the trust. My goodness, if a policeman shoots a criminal and committing a crime, they take away his gun sometimes so they can investigate. This man can still be a priest? After he's pleaded, was found guilty, and this is false mercy.
Yeah, no, it's a sick story. But I have to say, and we have to say in full candor, this is sort of the pattern that we saw under Pope Francis. And this case largely happened in 2017, 2018. This is when Pope Francis was running the show, and he did show an inordinate mercy to these people who were. I don't even know how to put it. Sexual degenerates, I guess, is the best way to put it, the kindest way to put it. Let's hope justice prevails here. It's awful. I mean, just to propagate that kind of material and to plant those seeds in people's minds and hearts and souls, it's deeply wicked and of course an abuse of the innocent children involved. Let's turn to the Middle East because I can't stand discussing that story anymore. Pope Leo continues to speak out on the violence there. On Sunday, he condemned what he called the barbarity of the war in Gaza and the indiscriminate use of force, as Gaza's civil defense agency said at least 93 Palestinians had been killed. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he got on the phone with Pope Leo on July 18th after an Israeli tank struck the only Catholic church in Gaza, killing 3 people. Now, according to the Prime Minister, he said Israel deeply regrets that a stray ammunition hit Gaza's Holy Family Church. That was the statement. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called Pope Leo on July 21st to discuss the war and the violence in the West Bank in the wake of the shelling. On July 20th, this is important, Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa, who is the Latin Patriarch, celebrated Mass at Holy Family Church, reminding parishioners they've not been forgotten. Bob, give me your gut on this. I mean, Gaza's been leveled. You look at the pictures, there's really nothing. The church is the only thing standing. The entire complex is bombed. The neighborhood's gone. Do you believe this was a stray tank shell? And the Pope just renewed his call for a ceasefire. How effective will that be?
Well, at that latter point is very difficult to say because the Israelis they're really pursuing hard violence against Hamas in Gaza and against Gazans in general. I'm a little skeptical of this, as Cardinal Pizzaballa is, that this was just a mistake. I mean, there are mistakes during the fog of war, but as Pizzaballa rightly pointed out, it's pretty easy to identify a church. It's got a cross on it, it's made in a certain way. They must have known what that area was. And generally, I'm on the side of Israel, but there has been a significant amount of Jewish Israeli pressure against Christians and killing of Christians, driving them off lands. I talk about this actually in my book my new book about martyrs in persecution in the 21st century, that in Israel there has been, even within the Jewish controlled territories, some pressure put on the church. So I don't know what to make about this, but I can say this. I know an awful lot of people who, like me, are basically on the side of Israel, who are starting to come around to the view that, look, it's not our decision to make, but it's probably getting to that point where the war has achieved what it can achieve. We stop the fighting at this point and then go on to deal with whatever is there in the end. And frankly, as you rightly say, Raymond, there's not much left there at this point.
No, it's gravel. I mean, the place has been reduced to gravel. And look, hostages, obviously those hostages should have been released long ago. That should have been the condition for the ceasefire. For whatever reason, that everybody decided, both sides are wanting to continue this thing. If I were Hamas, I would have released these hostages and tried to get everybody to come to the table. But Father Cardinal Pizzaballa visited Gaza with Orthodox leaders, and he said this war has to end. Even President Trump was furious with Netanyahu when he saw the church had been hit. And it was just the facade of the church. The body of the church is intact. But this Christian community is really under attack from all sides.
Yeah, should not, the Israeli army has to be super careful in not attacking religious sites, which are obviously not being used for war purposes. And it's well known. That Catholic Church is famous. The priest there is well known. In fact, he was wounded in the attack. So, it's very regrettable. But, the hostages, the headlines never lead with, while the hostage crisis continues, the Israeli army continues to seek to free them. Those are never the headlines. The headlines are always people dying in Gaza. The people are dying in Gaza because Hamas killed 1,700 Jews on October the 7th and refuses to release the hostages they took. And it's always forgotten. It's I regret to see the loss of life, but, civilian casualties occur when you declare war on another country in a legal manner, as they did with the massacres, and then expect that the opponents, the Israelis, are going to, do surgical strikes only. Well, sometimes you hit a building and there are people in it beside the terrorists. That's on the terrorists. So I don't like war. War is not good, but you got to fight back when you're under threat, and that's what the Israelis have done.
Well, look, I am very cognizant of it. I know you all are, of the Christians caught in the middle of this thing, because they're neither Hamas supporters nor are they, with Israel. They're people in between, and they remain in our prayers. And I think that's why Pizzaballa's walking this fire walk, trying to figure out how do I represent these people? How do I keep all sides together? And that is very difficult. But look, our prayers go out to all of them, particularly that beleaguered Christian community. But yeah, everybody's got to want peace. And I don't know why Hamas keeps digging in. Obviously Israel wants to, they want to drive Hamas out. But the question is, what do you do with all these Palestinian people? Where do they go? Egypt doesn't want them. Jordan doesn't want them. What are they to live in sea colonies? I don't know what you do with all those people. So that's another question, but we'll move on. Did you see this bizarre story? In the Archdiocesan Seminary of Denver, we missed this during our hiatus last week, a so-called blood ritual involving 15 seminarians and the vice rector of the seminary took place during a ski trip. Now, the video just surfaced, but it was from January of 2024. The incident also involved someone dressed in a Yeti costume. This odd blood oath ceremony was captured on video. Father, the Archdiocese of Denver has referred to this incident as a prank, and the individual responsible has been removed from seminary leadership, but the vice rector remains on the faculty as a professor. And earlier this year, in March, the rector of the seminary was removed for mishandling this affair. Inexplicably, this ritual apparently occurred not once but twice. A seminary who actually refused to participate was placed on sabbatical. I don't even know where to begin with this, Father.
Yeah.
They say it was a prank, and the guy dresses up as the Yeti in the ski cabin he owns, which probably requires its own investigation. But your thoughts, is this an appropriate prank for seminarians?
Well, in the category of pranks, you have to say, is this an appropriate prank? Obviously not.
Yeah.
It's crazed. This priest, vice rector, brought the seminaries to the home of a friend of his, and the friend dresses up in this, animal costume, and then they have a knife, and they tell the seminary, you got to come here, cut your arm, bleed, swear, don't tell anybody. This is insane. This is like a horror movie being done to kind of like, I don't know what the purpose was, but what does it reveal? It reveals disorder in that seminary of the highest degree. Why in the world is a vice rector thinking this is an appropriate way to deal with seminarians? And then secondly, why was he kept on the faculty of the seminary after doing this? This is insane. We take it out of context. Let's say the seminarians' families, instead of the seminarians, had been invited to this retreat. And then the vice rector says to them, well, as a sign of solidarity with your seminarian brother, you got to cut your arm and we're going to make you swear a blood oath. Everybody would have been, the priest would have been thrown out of the seminary. The bishop would have said, this is insane. We don't treat lay people like this. But then you reduce it to a mere prank and keep the guy on. Bad judgment, I'm sad to say, by the people in the Diocese of Denver.
Yeah, Father, as you were talking, I'm thinking maybe it's a new horror franchise. I Know What You Did Last Winter. That's what it'll be. It's a blood oath. Now, Bob, the Archdiocese apparently did an investigation. They determined there was no actual oath or blood. They brought out props and fake blood and stuff. But can't they go to a movie or bowling? What are they, 12?
Yeah, when I saw this, other than the immediate horror looking at what you're seeing there, I said to myself, even if this was a fraternity on some wild college campus, it would have been a crazy thing to do with his blood oath and Yetis and whatnot. And look, I'm not given to I hope, extreme judgments about things like this, but there's a whiff of the demonic in this, in my estimation.
Oh.
I mean, I'm not close to it, but it just seems to me that this is the kind of thing that seems to be tending in a direction that is pretty worrisome. If it had been, not blood and not this bizarre being, and maybe it was something else that it was kind of hazing. Maybe you could say, well, it was a misjudgment. But it seems to me to go beyond that.
Of course.
It's got the elements of that horror and that kind of witchery and the demonic that we see is beginning to take over the culture in a variety of ways. So I just don't like it. It just seems to me that everyone involved from this ought to be looked at very carefully, and I think they should be out of that seminary. But I think they should all be looked at very carefully and kept tabs on, because there is some, let's say, dark spirit operative here.
Raymond, I gotta throw this in, Raymond. Why is this priest filming this? Why is this being filmed? If
Why
this
is
is
it
a
being
prank,
memorialized?
is this a prank? Exactly. No, he's doing something with foreknowledge of what he wants to do. He wants to keep a record of it and use it somewhere in the future. This guy should have nothing to do with seminary formation.
Yeah, unless Lorraine and Ed Warren are in the adjoining ski lodge, don't go near this stuff, guys. It's just bizarre. Look, I could understand if you got a group of seminarians and you all are talking and a guy with a Yeti suit walks by the window. Okay, it's a lot of fun. Everybody jumps up and it's a scare. But this is like a ritual. And the guy came in and you swear an oath to the Yeti. It's crazy. It's just bizarre. So very inventive, paganism on display here. But Father, a few weeks ago, we talked about Pope Leo's reforms. I want to get to this. Archbishop of Westminster in the UK, Vincent Nichols, says this week he believes Pope Leo will announce new curial reforms in the fall. That would be reformation of the working bureaucracy at the Vatican. And this is part of the reason he was elected, Nichols says, because he has intimate knowledge of the church's governance from an insider's perspective. What do you make of this?
I don't know that Cardinal Nichols has a crystal ball, meaning he has the ability to see into the future. I don't know, reforms, does he mean structural and canonical reforms, that he's going to change things according to law? Does he mean new appointments? Does he mean simply new policies as regards, some hot button issues, including finance? I really don't know. I think we're in that interim period between the election of the Pope and when he really takes up the governance, with clear indications of what he wants to do. So I don't really know what to make of this prediction.
Yeah, Bob, the Pope, it was just announced that the Pope's going to extend his stay at Castel Gandolfo, which is the papal summer house. That tells me he's planning for the fall and winter, which is probably going to be very robust. But what might curial reforms look like? Pope Francis just did a whole overhaul of these curial offices, appointing a slew of people and allegedly streamlining. I mean, we were kind of critical of those reforms. But what might this look like? What's needed in your estimation?
Well, to begin with, Cardinal Nichols saying that he's going to continue with these reforms that Francis put in place, I don't know that he can know that. It just seems to me that it's one of the common principles of kind of political philosophy that a person learns responsibility when they are actually in an office. And so the Pope, sure, he's been around the administration of the Vatican for quite a while, but there's a difference between observing what other people are doing and maybe only seeing part of it, and then being the boss and having to make the decisions about what's going to happen. And clearly what he's going to have to do is he's going to have to deal with we've said this before, but there's the financial reforms, because the Vatican is in serious financial trouble at this point.
Yep.
And then there are the ongoing sexual reforms, like the ones that we were just talking about with this priest with the child pornography. So what that's going to mean in terms of the structure, the way things are going, I mean, we see these stories that worry me a bit, because it looks like DEI within the church, where he's talking about a broader participation of people from around the world and more women in positions. And look, in principle, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as what we're, at the end of the day, what we're getting are the best people in the jobs. But when we start to use those categories that are very familiar to us from politics, that have led to a lot of difficulty, in every place from government to universities to the workplace. I want to see competence in the Vatican again. We had a very competent economic reformer with Cardinal Pell. He was thrown out.
Yeah.
There are other things that can be done about the sexual abuse. This is going to really have to cut deep into some parts of the Vatican. And there may be structural reforms that are advisable too. But the writing is on the wall, and cosmetic changes are not going to be enough any longer. Leo is going to really have to dig deep if we want to rescue the Vatican from the stasis that in spite of many attempts at reform, haven't been able to produce very much activity.
Bob, very quickly, you sent a piece this week that my hair started standing up on edge, and there's not much to stand up. But I was looking at this on YouTube, and it allegedly told of reforms that the Pope was making, and it cited these documents. Of course, the documents don't exist. It's obvious clickbait to get, so I'm not giving them any promotion here. But what's the danger of this kind of AI-generated misinformation online?
Yeah, we have been saying for decades that people have misinterpreted Vatican II, and we're very upset about what the things that they've done in contradistinction to what the actual documents of Vatican II actually say. But the other day, I'm in my home office today, and my wife walked in here and she said to me, the Pope just passed 15 regulations that are going to revolutionize the church. And I said, it's impossible. She said, no, it's online, come look. So she took me in the other room and we looked at it together, and I said, okay, look. And we went to some reliable sources, Catholic News Agency, EWTN, Catholic Register. These are the good news agencies. Commentary and opinion are a different story. But if they're going to be obviously reliable, confirmable changes in the church, we're going to see them there. So I think we've got to tell everybody who's interested in what goes on in the Catholic Church, whether you're Catholic or not, to be very, very careful, because AI has now given people who are troublemakers tools to make a lot of trouble and to misrepresent what even the highest authorities in the church are doing. We may even see videos that look like that they're
right.
doing.
Well, Father, this is why when people tell me, you all should do AI versions of yourselves and just put that show up. No. We're trusted because we're not AI, and I think people like us are more important now than perhaps ever before because of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, there was somebody produced an AI version of Pope Leo discussing who was better, LeBron James or Michael Jordan, and it was very.
What was the answer, Father?
He was arguing for Jordan because he's a Chicago player. But I watched it and I'm saying, wait a minute, that's the Pope talking. But he couldn't possibly know all these statistics, and then so it was fake. It was a fake story, but they're all out there. So no, you trusted source. That's what you got to go to.
Okay, quickly, I want to get to a couple of things here. Attacks and desecrations on Catholic churches in particular, but a bunch of churches, are continuing at an alarming rate. On the 12th and 13th of July, the Church of Saint Germain in France was the target of desecration. Piles of feces were found at the entrance and inside the church, including the floor around the altar and beneath the altar cloth that had been torn off. Urine was found on the sacristy floor. The parish priest discovered the scene on Sunday morning, and this is not the first time that this particular church has been vandalized. Here in the United States, in the Archdiocese of Pittsburgh, the FBI is investigating vandalism at St. Elizabeth of Hungary Church in Allegheny County. Anti-Catholic and anti-Semitic graffiti was discovered on a statue of the Virgin Mary, a plaque on the bell tower and the door of a former convent. Father, what do you make of the rise we're seeing in these cases? What's driving this, particularly these anti-Catholic and anti-Christian attacks?
Well, for me, it's a manifestation of the hostility that the church has had throughout her history. And sad to say, in France, that's often propelled by Islamic immigrants. In other words, Muslims who are anti-Catholic and not afraid of risking getting arrested. And a lot of churches have burned in France. There was the murder of that priest in northern France while he was celebrating Mass. Now there's this incident. It's just an endless series, and the French government has to put more effort into suppressing this. And in our own country, there isn't that same level of hostility by most. We don't have a Muslim desecration problem here by and large, but we do have occasional incidents. I don't know what the incident in Pittsburgh diocese was, but whoever did it, arrested and jailed. I mean, that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Bob, according to the USCCB, I'm looking this up, at least 387 incidents of vandalism and desecration have occurred across 43 states and the District of Columbia since May of 2020. What do you think's propelling this? What is this?
Well, some of it is just satanic, I think, and to use that term again. The last chapter in my book on modern persecution, I'm not trying to blow my own horn, but I happen to know these statistics because I have a final chapter in there about precisely this. Yeah, both the United States and Canada, we're not immune from this in North America. And Father's right. It doesn't seem to be primarily driven by the kind of Muslim anti-Christian clash that has existed throughout history since Islam was founded. Here it's more a kind of a desecration, that kind of bubbling anti-Christianity below the surface that looks at Christianity as something evil, that preached hate against gays and repressed women and all that sort of thing. So the bishops did a survey, and over that 4 years there were almost 400 instances of arson and vandalism, etc. By contrast, France, I have this in my book too, France loses 2 religious buildings per month. And to their credit, the French government has actually put in several million euros trying to prevent these things. But the problem is so widespread, and the areas that they have to protect, because France obviously was a deeply Christian country, Catholic country at one point, it makes it hard for them to police all of it. In fact, there was a story, I cite it in my book, that there was a Muslim group that was going to try to burn down Notre Dame again shortly after it was going to be reopened after that horrible fire. So you can just imagine the kind of challenges that the forces of order in a place like France are dealing with.
Yeah. I got to go to something, and we're going to end on this, and I don't know if this is a happy topic or a sad one. Father, I'm going to give you a crack. Fox News is reporting, EWTN did a report on this, celebrating Popular beach town brings Sunday Mass to shore for faithful. That's the Fox News headline. And it's Long Island, and 3 parishes are hosting masses on the beach. Your reaction to this? I mean, I frankly don't know what that is to celebrate. I thought we were forbidden to get married on the beaches and at resorts because you do sacred things in sacred spaces. What's the story here?
Well, I think, unfortunately, this is a desperate attempt to become relevant. We have to, do things that people are going to find, entertaining and useful and convenient. I know that part of Brooklyn, the Rockaways. Mm-hmm. There are parish churches located there precisely so that people go to Mass before they go to the beach.
Right.
I was a military chaplain. I celebrate Mass in the field. That's one thing. We don't have chapels, out in the field. But you have a church right there. Mass is sacred. The house of God. We're kind of, after the council, we got away from this idea of the church as the house of God, and we got into like worship space and multi-purpose areas. So the house of God is profound. The temple of God in heaven is incarnated in a certain way in the church building. So, we enter into the church. It's a cruciform building. It has a whole structure and order. Everything communicates to us. We've entered into the sacred antechamber of heaven. Why would you have a Mass people in bathing suits and flip-flops when you have a church right across the street? I'm not in favor of this.
Yeah. Bob, nothing says sacrality like thongs and Speedos at your Mass service. Go ahead, Bob. I'll give you the last word, if you can find one after that.
I'm afraid I've become corrupt myself because I looked at the pictures and I said to myself, well, at least they're at Mass. But Father is right. I mean, if you've got church buildings nearby, and basically what you're doing is you're celebrating the sacred mysteries in a place where, 5 minutes later, people are going to be throwing beach balls around. They're going to be swimming. They're going to be, God knows doing what on beaches these days, probably half naked, maybe entirely naked in America these days. There's just a clash of sensibilities about this. So, look, it's good to meet people where they are, but maybe you should meet them and provide a van and take them down to the parish and then bring them back to the beach.
You don't even have to. There's literally a church right there, as Father was saying. It's on the beach. The church is on the beach.
Yep. Well, there it is, Raymond. The fathers in the past of the church knew what they were doing. You build a church in the neighborhood, including a beach area, so people can go to Mass. You don't just send the priest down to the sand and say, celebrate Mass here.
Yeah. Well, we will leave it there, Posse. I thank you for the time. And if you want more of the Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or our podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, until the Posse rides again, stay the course, follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.